But anyway, let me give you the pat.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming here. Everybody can hear okay? Oh, okay. No? Oh dear. The sound. Maybe this thing is not quite.
Where's Ron?
Let me get this closer. Yeah. Let's see if we can get this. How's that? Is that better? I hope that's better. How's that? Oh, good. Well, I was going to start out with a story, but now I'm not because, well, let me begin this way and say you all got a handout. If you didn't get a handout, be sure to get it. But I can't quite go with the handout. You've got all the information there, but I'm not going to organize it that way. I was going to start by telling 3 stories that tell something about Cymbidiums, and I will get to those. But someone brought me a plant, and they have to leave in 20 minutes. They're right up here. And they had a question. Becky, sweetie, I brought my friend Becky to help me because you know I've got replaced knees and replaced shoulders. And this is the first time I've done this Cymbidium thing again with the replaced shoulders, but they worked fine, my God. Yeah, so we'll try. Okay, some people right here brought me this plant and said, is it ready to divide? And I said, well, yes, you could. They got it as a gift, Mother's Day. You could divide it, or you could just plant it one size on, but this is going to be difficult to get out of here. So I want to show you how. One thing. Another thing you could do is this. Step on it.
Should you teach those with care?
Wow. Done. So the point is you don't have to be quite so careful with these things. And then, now these roots are really thick. My feeling is we should loosen them up and shorten them a bit. And I would just take a saw and saw off the bottom. Or you can even, usually I do this a little later. Yeah, I told them don't give me a glass table. Because I'll break it. There we are, and then break these up a little. I would just cut through them a couple of places. Just a few places. I tried to break them with my hands, and I couldn't. Now, Becky, could you help me pull these up? You always want to get these, you know what I forgot is my clippers. I'm sure I put them in the car. We left them in the car. Okay, well, no, I don't want you to leave me. Not yet. Yeah, okay. We can use, this is a Japanese soil knife or plant knife. These are great. You can just saw off the old, can you pull these out? We're pulling out the old stakes so they don't get you in the eye. Then you need to clip off the old flowers. Okay, get that out of there. This is kind of not in order with what I was going to do, but, you know. Okay, now, you could divide this if you wanted to. There it is. Roots are loosened up. I cut it down a few times. Everything's in very good shape here. All of the pseudo bulbs, these are called the pseudo bulbs with Cymbidiums. They sit on top of the soil mix, you put them in, and the roots go all hidden underground. This is a good bunch of roots, and I've shortened them, and I've loosened them up a bit by cutting through them. This will do fine. Then I'm just going to put it in the next size. So you don't ever want to drown it in soil mix. So Do you live along the coast or inland?
Right here.
Yeah, well, if you live along the coast, the best thing to plant them in is just pure bark. You can use orchid bark, or you can use medium-sized pathway bark. Now this container is exactly the right size for this plant. We just want to fill around with the bark. And then you need a dowel. I don't have a dowel, so the handle of this works fine, and you just bang it down like that. The handle of your mallet works fine but you want to get that tight down in there. So
How do you decide the size of the pot?
you just go one size larger.
Oh, really? Okay.
Never.
In your book, you say 4 inches larger.
You know, I'm not a purist in anything, and I didn't bring a yardstick to measure with, but this is probably about, what would you say, Becky, 2 inches, 3 inches larger.
Okay, sure.
3 inches larger. And so moderation in all things, you know, and there are some rules we really want to follow. One is covering the roots and having the pseudo bulbs above the soil. When I first got interested in Cymbidium orchids, happened like this. You want to give this back to the folks. Now that went really quick, yes.
Would you divide that big tank?
We're going to divide this one later. Now comes a little bit of the lecture. I wasn't going to start with that demo, but it just worked that way. So, when I got first interested in Cymbidium orchids, someone gave me one, and I stuck it under a tree because I knew it was the shade plant. This would be 40 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, and it never bloomed again, or not until I learned how. Well, then I I was a magazine editor, which meant I wrote most of the articles in the magazine. And I went to interview a Cymbidium grower, and I wrote an article on Cymbidiums. By interviewing this man, I learned all about Cymbidiums, and from then on I did what was right for the one plant I had, and it bloomed. It was not a great Cymbidium, but it bloomed. It was pretty good. It bloomed every year thereafter once I learned the secret. So what I'm here to do today is to tell you the secrets. And sometimes the best way to remember these things is to hear a story. So here's one story that tells about Cymbidiums. I was working for the magazine about a year after I had written that article on Cymbidiums, and someone phoned me from La Jolla, a nice gentleman, and he said, we want to pay you to come to our garden and do a consultation and look at our garden. And by the way, I don't do consultations anymore, but I did then. And look at our garden and tell us what we're doing wrong, because we have about 300 Cymbidiums and none of them bloom, and they used to bloom wonderfully well. Well, I was sure I knew the answer already, but instead I got in the car and I drove over there and I looked at the Cymbidiums. Well, I walked into this beautiful home on the hill of La Jolla, facing north, up the steps, into this lovely home, and they took me through the house into the back patio. And it was exactly like this. There was a patio here, and then there were, instead of seats where you are sitting, there was an amphitheater of benches just like you are on, and they were completely covered with cymbidiums. So it was like an amphitheater covered with, I think they said 500 cymbidiums or something like that. It was incredible. Huge orchids, none of them in bloom. They were just green. And this couple was so nice and so delightful, and they were almost in tears, and they said, we feed them. I'm hearing a voice.
The gentleman needs to turn off his mic. The gentleman that introduced you needs to turn off his mic. Do you know where he is? Steve?
Steve.
Hey, Steve, turn off your mic.
Steve? Hey, Steve.
Steve, turn off your mic.
Sigh.
Well, it doesn't really matter.
See what he says.
Becky's gone to find Steve and turn off his mic. But anyway, back to my story. So, on the back of this amphitheater, all covered with cymbidiums, were eucalyptus trees and dripping the leaves. But I got to the point, I forgot to tell you when Steve started talking on his mic, that these people said they fed their cymbidiums with orchid food, like they'd always done, and they switched the fertilizer in September to a high bloom formula, and despite all that, all the cymbidiums did was grow and would never bloom. And this is my first point. You cannot get a cymbidium to bloom by feeding it with fertilizer, any kind of fertilizer. Now, that doesn't mean you must not feed them. You must feed them. That's one of the steps. But you can't get them to bloom by feeding them. The thing that makes a cymbidium bloom is two-pronged. One is getting enough light, and the other is temperature. Okay. When these people first got this great collection of cymbidiums, they planted the eucalyptus trees in an arc around the back of the garden. As long as they were small, in the middle of summer, those cymbidiums had plenty of sunshine. Additionally, in the hottest time of the year, cold air came down that mountain in La Jolla and fell into that garden and filled up that patio, and it was 20 degrees of difference between night and day temperatures, and that's what makes a cymbidium bloom. A cymbidium has to have 20 degrees difference, so that means night times in the 50s, daytimes in the 80s, because they don't like it over 90 degrees. They grow perfectly in Rancho Santa Fe. They don't grow well in the desert. It gets too hot there. So this is the perfect plant for the coastal area of Southern California. But if you ever have had trouble getting your cymbidium to bloom, make sure that you put it out under the open sky in August, so that the leaves begin to go yellow. Full sun in August, or if you live in inland a little bit, it's fine to have a shade house that provides 2/3 sun through shade cloth. If you live along the coast, don't grow them in a gazebo. Don't grow them in a shade house. Don't grow them under a tree. Don't treat them as shade plants in the summer. Put them out in your patio or anywhere where they will get sun, enough sun to turn the leaves yellow, and enough cold air at night that it's 20 degrees cooler at night. Now, if you only have a patio or a porch, I can tell you right now, if you live in zone 24, you're not going to have success. Except you can have success if you grow the small and medium flowered ones. Now, the medium flowered ones need only 15 degrees difference between night and day temperatures. So this is a large flowered cymbidium. These ones need 20 degrees difference between night and day temperatures. This is a medium-sized flower one. These need about 10 or 15 degrees. And some of these will bloom year-round, which means they are not day length. They're day length neutral. Now, with most Cymbidiums, how day length matters is this way. After June 23rd or 22nd, whatever it is, the summer solstice, right? The days begin to become longer. The minute the days begin to get longer, the Cymbidium thinks, that means it's time to bloom. Cymbidiums originated in Southeast Asia throughout a broad swathe of mountain country from the Himalayas through the foothills all the way to Japan, through the foothills and mountains of Southeast Asia, where the bugs and the climate is such that the insects that pollinate the Cymbidiums are active in winter. So that is why the Cymbidium blooms beginning in early fall, puts out spikes, and blooms in winter. So you don't have to worry about day length. That is perfect. You don't need to worry about that. What you do want to be aware of is that in August, you need them to be in light so that when they are stimulated at that time of year to put out the bloom spikes, they're getting enough light so that they will be stimulated to put those spikes out. And you will begin to see the beginning around the bottom of the plants of the spikes beginning to grow in late August. Then in September, you can switch fertilizers if you want, but I'm going to go into the fertilizing a little later on in this talk. Don't let me forget, but I don't want to swamp you with too much information at once, though you have it all on the handout. You have every bit of this on the handout. So I had gotten to the fact that they put out the spikes in summer. Now here is another story that tells something about Cymbidiums. During the 17th and 18th centuries is when Cymbidiums were discovered by plant explorers who went all over the world, English and German plant explorers. They were mostly English explorers who discovered the Cymbidiums in the mountains of Southeast Asia. And they were very special plants, and they collected them, and they brought them back to England. And they did not get into the hands of nursery gardens. They did not get into the hands of, goodbye folks, I thought they were leaving, they said 20 minutes, but maybe not. They did not get into the hands of mom and pop gardeners. They got into the hands of the dukes and earls and the grand estates. These people had enormous greenhouses, and they put the Cymbidiums in the greenhouses, and they had a lot of trouble bringing them into bloom. But they did manage. They managed to bring some into bloom, but they never caught on. They fed them, they never caught on to what was making them bloom. And they would not give the Cymbidiums to anyone else. These has cost thousands and thousands of dollars. They were very expensive, special plants. They were considered a specialty, and only dukes and earls and people with grand estates owned them. And then what happened is the Second World War. And when the threat of bombing came to England, some of the best Cymbidiums were in the south of England, and they had bloomed by happenstance, which I won't go into. It's kind of interesting, but we won't go into that. So they had meanwhile come to California, made friends with people here, particularly in Santa Barbara, and they shipped hundreds and hundreds of Cymbidium plants just as the war was breaking out. About when I came to America, Cymbidiums came along too, and they came by ship, and they came all the way to Santa Barbara. Well, there were growers in Santa Barbara who accepted these plants, and there were hundreds of them, and they didn't have time to set up the range houses. You know, a lot of people didn't realize the Second World War was going to happen until the minute it did. And so they started building greenhouses for the Cymbidiums, and the Cymbidiums arrived in fall, and they stuck them kind of in semi-shade outdoors, and they just didn't get the greenhouses up. Well, by golly, no, wait, I'm wrong. They arrived in spring, and they stuck them out there while they were building. And by August, they'd all begun to put on spikes. And that winter, they all bloomed.
Unbelievable.
And everybody figured out, immediately everybody figured out there was something about California that made those Cymbidiums bloom. And they talked to the University of California, and of course the University of California was doing a lot of work at that time on this sort of thing. What makes a plant bloom? Day length or light? And they figured out it must be temperature. So immediately we knew that Cymbidiums will grow perfectly out of doors. And that's how that was discovered. Not only did they grow perfectly out of doors in California, but they started growing like mad. In the greenhouses in England, they'd hardly grown. Now outdoors, in our temperatures, they started growing so fast, they had to divide them. They kept track of every plant. At the end of the war, they gave back to England every plant 8 cent, only bigger and better than the ones that had, you know, all the earls and dukes got their plants back. But we had hundreds and hundreds of Cymbidiums here. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about what to look for when you buy a Cymbidium, because this is important too. And I have a story on this. When I was on TV, a couple told a friend of mine that they'd like me to do a video on Cymbidiums and come to their greenhouses, which are really not greenhouses, but more like shade houses, range houses. And I was thrilled by this. So we went to this place. We were only given an address in Carlsbad on a main road. We got there, and there was a dirt road and a truck waiting to greet us. And the guy said, "I'm going to take you there." In other words, they didn't give us the directions how to get to the nursery. And we drove, I don't know how far, maybe 5 miles, this way, that way, this way, that way, this way, that way, through all these fields, and out in the middle of nowhere, where you couldn't even see a house in any direction, here was some huge range houses. They did not want to be found by anybody. They did not want to even tell us how to get there, and I could not tell you how to get there again. It was rather like the CIA or something. You could never find this place again. When I went inside, I realized why. Now, the grower and his wife were very interesting. The grower was extremely friendly. His wife was not. And she was Hungarian. My husband was a Hungarian, very charming one. She was gorgeous. She was Hungarian, and she looked at us as if we were going to steal everything. So it must have been the husband who got the idea of having us do a television show. And then they opened the greenhouses, and I could see why. Here were greenhouses with a rainbow of color, as far as you can see, of Cymbidium orchids. They had this color. They had pink, yellow, gold, white, lavender, purple, red, not really brown, but kind of a rust color, and multicolors. And they were all bright and clear and never a dull color in them. But here's the extraordinary thing. Here were the strap-like leaves down here. Here were the flowers. There were 40 large. large flowers on every spike.
Wow.
That is breeding. Have you ever seen one in a nursery like that? These people bred them. They did not want to let them out. I asked to buy a plant. They showed me the ones for sale. They were like this. They don't sell them. They are not for sale. They don't want anyone even to know they've got them. But I showed them on television. So the point is, when you buy a Cymbidium and it has this number of flowers, the following year, no matter how much you feed it, no matter how carefully you take care of it, it will never have more. You can buy, especially in Santa Barbara, and here I have seen them at Rogers. Very fine nurseries will occasionally have very fine varieties with about twice that many flowers on a stem. This is the end of the season. I have seen wonderful Cymbidiums here at Rogers. Here's the thing that I want to tell you. When I was a kid, I thought $40 was a lot to pay for a Cymbidium that had that many flowers on it. I should have done it. Eventually I learned, you only buy the best. You don't buy them at big box stores. You don't buy them at cut rate places. You don't buy them at the grocery store. And the reason you don't is those are all the rejects. Those are the ones that these growers who have these multi-million-dollar plant collections throw out. They come into bloom. They're a result of their breeding program. They don't want to waste it. They want to make a little more money. So they sell maybe 1,000 or 2,000 rejects to the grocery stores. Look sometime when you go to the grocery store. They will often have gorgeous colors, but maybe only 3 or 4 flowers on a stem. That means if you're given that for a gift, say thank you, delight in it, be joyful, keep it in your house, and then when you're done with it, throw it out. Because you only want to keep the finest. Cymbidiums are a great hobby plant. You can develop a collection in all the sizes. I didn't tell you that the cascading types, I don't have any to show you today. There's one type of Cymbidium that has little tiny flowers, and they cascade down like that. You can put them, do you want to bring in that hanging basket? You can, instead of growing them in pots, grow them in a hanging basket. They will cascade down all around, and you can keep them in a hanging basket for years and years. They only need maybe 10 degrees difference, or even 8 degrees difference between daytime and nighttime temperatures. So the miniatures are great, and grow them in hanging baskets. That way they'll be above snails and slugs. You can feed them exactly the same as the others. Sometimes they bloom year-round. Sometimes the mid-size sometimes bloom year-round. The main thing that I'm telling you is that when you see a very fine variety, which means 3 things. 1, very good color. Lots of flowers to a stem, to a spike. Many, many flowers to a spike, because feeding them will never make them have more. And the flowers held way above the foliage. That's another thing. With the cascading time, the kind that grow in the hanging basket, the leaves can be on top, and the pseudo bulbs, and the flowers can fall down and cascade down. These are epiphytic type of Cymbidiums. These larger ones are actually terrestrial orchids. You can even grow them in the ground in good places where you know they're going to get the correct spread of temperature. In well-drained soil, you can grow them in the ground. They're terrestrial orchids from Southeast Asia. The small ones are epiphytic, but the same thing, they're Cymbidiums. So they don't need as much of a spread of temperature between night and day. It seems to me that I was saying one thing and never quite finished the thought. Did anyone pick up on that? If not, I'm sure, yeah.
The growers that you were saying that you think, are there specific growers that you think have a better orchid?
The growers. This is interesting. There are several hobby growers in San Diego County who have done some breeding. The breeding is very difficult. It involves the sterile soil and vials and all kinds. It's not something a hobbyist wants to do. But there are a few people, horticulturalists in San Diego County, maybe up here too, who have created wonderful collections by breeding. And one of these died, one of those guys died, and his family couldn't continue, so they sold the plants. Those plants today are being kept by other people and being sold in farmers markets. So farmers markets are one place to look. Another place is nurseries in Santa Barbara, and another place is right here, because I have seen very, very good ones at Rogers Gardens through the years. They will have wonderful ones with many, many flowers on the stem and very good color. I think what I was trying to remember to tell you was flowers held above foliage. So when you have a plant like this, let's put this up here because I'm going to divide it out. And anything else I want to tell you, I'm going to tell as I go along. When you see how erect the foliage is on this one. I know what variety this is. This is a good old variety. Yeah, that's a good idea. This is a good old variety. It's growing in the garden of a friend of mine. I think it's a variety I once had. It's a one of the old good ones. It has a lot of large flowers on a stem, on a spike, and it's mostly white, and it has a sort of red center. We don't worry about names of cymbidiums. There are so many, and many of them are not even named. Some are named, but it doesn't count. Since I've told you what to look for, you don't need a name. You look at it and you know it's great. And if it's very great, it probably has a name, but who cares? Because you'll never find it again. You know, you just gotta snaffle them up. The minute you find the good ones, snaffle them up. Now you see how erect this foliage is? Well, you really ideally want to find a cymbidium that has a long spike like that and grows that much taller, and the top is all covered with flowers. If you don't, if it has many flowers but they're all hidden in the foliage, that's another bad characteristic. On the other hand, you might find one where it has this kind of foliage, very tall, but the flowers are about here. Well, that's easily handled. You just bend the foliage down, and you can gradually, without breaking the foliage, just kind of train the foliage to go down. You can put a little rock on top of it if necessary, but see how easy that is? Just bend the foliage down a little, and your flowers are going to look a lot better. You don't need to break it, but just bend it like that. If you have a lot of, I mean, a plant like this plant, my friends lent to me, they said it had 12 spikes this year. It was growing in the ground. It's been in the ground for a long time. You see like that? Then all the spikes would show. This, by the way, this is a 70-year-old knife. It belonged to my stepfather. I hate to tell you this. I broke this off the tip when I was a kid, and he gave this to me. It looked better than this for a wedding present. Well, never get it. As a reminder of my naughtiness as a child. Actually, he was a great guy. He was fun to write about. He was difficult to live with. I wrote about it. Yeah, my dad was great, but he couldn't earn a living. Neither could my stepfather. But I wrote about that adventure once in a book called All My Edens. You can buy it off the internet, used. This is actually working. This is a collector's item, this knife, I want you to know. My God, what a great knife. Jeff, if you're around somewhere, he was my stepfather. I really like this knife, thanks. But I didn't write him thank you. No, I didn't. And it did cut our relationship. You always want to give a penny back. I didn't know that then.
When you bend the leaves down, does it make the spikes taller? Will it
Pardon
make
me?
the spikes come up taller when you bend the leaves down? Will you get a taller flower?
No, the question was, will the flower grow taller if you bend the foliage down? No, they bend the foliage down only when they're in bloom in order to show off the flowers better, because you don't want the flowers hidden. Okay, okay, I'll hold this. When I was younger, I used to sometimes sit on the ground, you know, and use my feet and shove a pot off and pull with the top. You want to lift it up here again? Okay. I don't know what I'd do without Becky this demo. Well, this is the last time I'm doing this. This is my final swan song. I don't know how many times I've done this talk and said it's the last time. There's something else I want to tell you folks, because you're so sweet to come here. No matter what I talk about, it's incredible. I'm very grateful. But I want to tell you something else, and that is, I'm going to retire when I'm 91. And then I'm going to do nothing but paint. I love to paint, and I haven't done enough of it. And I'm going to stop writing books.
Good for you.
But until I'm 91, I'm going to keep right on. Unless I lose my marbles. And you guys have to tell me when I begin to stop remembering.
Then you'll be a real painter.
You mean when I'm kind of kooky? I'm kooky already. I sharpened this last night.
It's pretty rough.
Yeah, you don't need to you know, these things, they don't have very good looking roots, and you always want to reduce the roots of this, because it was growing in the ground, has some short ones. Thanks for getting my clippers. This is when you use clippers and clip a few roots off anything loose, anything damaged, anything diseased. Now, these are the back bulbs. We don't have a 4-inch pot, do we? But, oh yeah, those little ones. Well, that little 4-inch. Okay. You can root these if you want to. But remember that greenhouse I was telling you about with the great varieties and the woman who thought we were coming to steal them? Well, I saw piles of these back bulbs, and I was just dying to take just one. But I didn't do it. Because, you know, that's bad karma.
Right.
So, if you want to root the back bulbs, if you have one of these great varieties, if you go to Santa Barbara, to one of these places where they really have some very fine cymbidiums, you can just buy one back bulb if they're too expensive.
Is that field still going?
This will grow fine, just keep it moist.
Was that all bark that you put in there?
This is pure bark. Yeah, along the coast, use pure bark. It's going to break down anyway. It's just perfect.
What do you do it inland?
Inland, mix it with 1/3 or maybe, yeah, about 1/3 potting soil. That's why I have the potting soil.
Do you usually wet the bark down before you plant?
No, just use it dry.
Okay.
You're going to water them about once a week or so. Yeah. This will grow leaves and start all over again. Oh, it will begin, if you take good care of it, fertilize it. You can fertilize this with liquid fish. Or, I'm going to talk, shall I talk now about fertilizers?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, let's see what we've got. First, let me tell you there are two methods of fertilizing. One method is switch fertilizer system. This is the way I first learned. There are two formulas. This is called Grow More Orchid, Premium Orchid Food from Rogers. So you know when it's Rogers, it's going to be good. And I mean that so sincerely. This is a truly great nursery. I know I'm here speaking to you, but boy, I believe in this nursery and why I come every year to speak here. They're great folks and they have good products. So here is this. This is 6-30-30. That's for bloom. And this is for growth. This is 30-10-10. 30 means 30 nitrogen to 10-10. That's the formula. So this one is for growth. You after your cymbidiums stop blooming, you switch to this fertilizer and fertilize with this. In August or September at the latest, you can switch to bloom formula and fertilize with that according to package directions. With this system, you're mixing this with water and you're watering them with your fertilizer according to package directions, probably once every 2 weeks. Are there other things?
Oh, there were two, and then there were two over here.
Oh, yeah. Here's another another orchid food. One is 20, here's 20-20-20. That's even. And here's 20-10-20. Well, the other is better for cymbidiums. The first one I gave you. The first one is better. Here's another way to go. Well, this is just straight flower food. We won't use this one. Okay. Now here is another way to go. If you can get triple 15 slow release, it comes in a 40-pound bag. The one I used is called Apex Blue. And you just put if you've got a big plant, you just throw a handful of that on maybe once every 2 months. It's slow release. It says on the package with slow release how long it's going to last.
So triple, say it again, triple.
Triple,
It's 15.
Triple 15.
no, triple 14. For some reason, fertilizers, because the even numbers, they don't come in 15, 15, 15. Because of the percentage. Triple 14, 14,
And the
14,
name of it
14.
is Apex?
Apex Blue.
Apex
You'll
Blue.
only be able to find that through professional nursery places. But the point is, if you've got 20-20-20 or 18-18-18, all the same, even 10-10-10, and slow release, anything that's even formula, just fertilize year round with it. And then if you want, and if you do everything I've told you about the temperature, they're going to bloom like mad. The big message is,
Would Osmocote work as a slow release?
would you speak louder?
Osmocote.
Yes, is Osmocote an even formula? I don't think it is. I don't think it's
Slow
even.
release, but it's
I think Osmocote is 10, I don't know, what is it?
I don't think it is.
I don't think, no, I'm saying, I haven't tried with Osmocote, and Osmocote's more expensive. I don't know that it will work as well. All I'm telling you is use an even formula so that it's like neutral on, it's not more nitrogen, it's not more phosphorus, it's not more potassium, it's equal of each. So all the bloom ingredients are the same as the nitrogen. Yeah, I'll get to you in a minute. The point being that with cymbidiums, they grow year round. So you never want to stop you never want to stop feeding for growth. Now with this system of, as I told you, the slow release, once a month, once every 2 months, year round, every time they're watered, they're fed. Additionally, if you want to make a few more flowers or, you know, something, you can zap them a couple of times in fall, late August or September, early October, with 0-10-10. Do we have that?
What is that?
It comes in a bottle.
If you want
Oh,
extra
probably
flowers
not.
in August.
Well, 0-10-10 is a liquid fertilizer, just phosphorus and potassium. I actually do think that it might give you a few more spikes. The point is, if you have many cymbidiums, as I once did, have about 40 or 50, the slow release way, I mean, is so much easier. And then zap them. I had my gardener pour on the what did I say, 0-10-10. I had him pour it on a couple of times. But he would not remember to do it every week, so I just tell him, you know, pour it on, mix this, give it to Cymbidium. Another week, 2 weeks later, tell him to do it again. Probably got a few more spikes, but not appreciably many. If I forgot, it doesn't matter.
And how long do you do that? Until they bloom?
No, just a couple of times is
A
enough.
couple of times?
Yeah, like every 2 weeks in September, or maybe begin in August, maybe 2 or 3 times. Point is, it just gives them a little extra sock. Remind them to put out those spikes. Then the
Is Apex Blue the name of the product?
Apex Blue is the name of a fertilizer that's a professional fertilizer for growers. You can find it in San Diego County at a place called Hydroscape. Just look it up on the internet. Everything these days you can find on the internet if you search well enough. Just Google it. I haven't done that with Apex Blue, but it must be.
GLU.
Apex Red is for interior gardens. Apex Blue is along the coast. And there may be a different formula. You want the even formula. 14-14-14. And you can also purchase that formula in organics if you're a purist. I often say I'm not a purist in anything. I'm an organic gardener, but I'm not a purist in anything. I believe in moderation in all things.
I agree.
And one drink is enough for me. Yeah, one martini does fine. That's moderation. Anyway, we take these off. And I might have to cut these off. See, one of these is rotted. You always want to look for things like that. There's a bit of rot here. That's not good. Anything rotted, you want to cut it off. I'm just going to cut these off. Pardon me?
Cut off the leaves when you separate it?
No, you don't cut off the leaves. The Cymbidium needs the leaves to give the plant vigor.
Is it squishy when it's rotted? So can I see the rotted one?
It's wet. And it's, I've seen them when they're squishy, but that one is not squishy. But I have seen them that way, and sometimes they're emptied out. Just want to make sure you get all these off. You take away all the back bulbs, you're not going to stick the back bulbs in. Now this is a very big division. I think, for me, I would like this size, but I'm going to cut it down one more because I think my friends probably expect me to do a better job. Okay, this is going to be a little tougher though because I think we're getting into something there. I'm afraid we're cutting through one of the pseudo bulbs, but I've often done that. It doesn't matter. Okay, hold your hats there. I'm going to try to. You want to pull this back? I'm going to try to get this Oh boy, hit it just right. I'm not a really good shot. My brother used to say, if Pat has a shotgun, stand right in front of her. And I tell you, I couldn't hit a thing. My brother could put food on the table. I could only do it by throwing things. Now, name. Steve cut this up so I didn't have to do it. I wrote Rogers what I needed. They provided all this. I brought the plants. Orchid containers often have slits up the side. I often in the past have cut slits up the side with the long-handled loppers. These are long-handled loppers, and I can cut them that way. Steve did this for us. If you heat the container or put it in the sun, it cuts more easily. This is great because it makes for better drainage. Good drainage is very important for cymbidiums. Even though they're terrestrial orchids, they need good drainage. Now I'm going to put a little of this in the bottom. See if I can make this big a hole.
Can you plant them in clay pots?
That's a good question.
What was the question?
The question was, can you plant them in clay pots?
Clay.
I have seen some beautiful orchid pots made of clay. Recently, I haven't seen any. You can plant them in clay pots if they are orchid pots. Orchid pots made of clay will have holes up the sides, or will even have holes all over. I used to have a beautiful one that had round holes all over it. And it finally broke. It was made in Mexico, but it was gorgeous, and I grew orchids in it. They need very good drainage, and it was kind of roundish, but it was made for orchids, and it had all these holes in it, and I filled it with bark and grew cymbidiums in it many years, and then it broke. So yes, you can, but not in an ordinary clay pot. But on the other hand, what you can do, since we're on this subject, bring me one catch that. Just, yeah, without the epithet. Yeah, oh, with that. Okay. This is a what I call a cash bow. When you have an orchid in bloom, like you could bring in yeah. This is an epidendrum orchid. We're not talking about these today. They're wonderful and easy to grow. They're marvelous. If I had time, I would talk about them, but I don't have time. Once it's in bloom, you can put it in a cash bow. Now, if you have many, many, many orchids, and you want to make a collection like I had, and you'll see pictures of my collection in some of my books with all the various colors. I collected all the colors of cymbidiums, and they were all good ones with lots of flowers. But they didn't all bloom at the same time because I began collecting in fall. Another thing I want to tell you is that some varieties will bloom for Christmas. There's a very great gold that is throughout Southern California, and it blooms for Christmas every year. It's just marvelous, and it's very floriferous, and it always blooms. So you buy one like that, and then you have it forever at Christmas. And then you divide it, and you have so many plants that you can keep some in the garden and take some into the house. Now, the ones that you enjoy in your house at Christmas or whenever won't probably bloom the following year. But if you've made a lot of them, who cares? You've got enough of them. So you can use them like cut flowers in the house. You can even cut them. I just think cymbidiums are the best thing to grow because you can use them as cut flowers. You can bring them in the house. You can make a gorgeous display in your patio. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, Becky, could you lift this up? Here is what I want to tell you. Here is a schedule for cymbidiums. First, if you're growing cymbidiums, begin at Christmas time looking for plants in bloom. Look for the qualities that I told you about, and then buy one or two and have them forever in bloom at Christmas. If you're making a collection like I did, you want at least to begin with 7 plants. If you have 7 plants, at least 3 will bloom every year. You're going to find not every single one will bloom every single year. Have 7, 5 will bloom, let's say. I think I better say 5 out of 7 will bloom if you have 7. So that gives you an idea. Not every variety will bloom every year. Some of the very best ones won't always bloom every year. Some of the best varieties will bloom year after year. So then continue to look. Look in January, look in February, March, April, May, June. That's a whole bunch of months. And you'll get all these different varieties that will bloom at different times of year, and you will have bloom for 6 months of the year. So this is what I did. So I begin about Christmas, making a wonderful display of these in my patio where I see them out of my front window and see them every time they're in the I go in the patio. A magnificent display, and then as one fades, I have Raimondo take it and put it behind the house. We've got a special place, the other side of the carport, and then another one would come into bloom, he'd bring it back. So I had this continual new ones coming in for 6 months until finally in May, that was the grand finale around Mother's Day, and the last ones were in bloom. So you start early collecting and you get them. So they do bloom at different times of year through the winter months. There's something else I was going to tell you. Oh yeah, here's the schedule. After they bloom, you cut off the blooms like I showed you, pull out the supports, and you put them, then if you want to put them in a shady place under a tree, fine, no problem. The way my garden is arranged, it overlooks the ocean up high on a hill, Del Mar, overlooking the ocean. So I have an area on the other side of the carport where we keep a lot of stuff. It's not messy, it's neat, but it's kind of a holding area for plants when they're not being used, or for pots and things like that. So the Cymbidiums went there after they bloomed, and there we kept them until August. And then, because I'm in zone 24, the 1st of August I would have Raimondo bring all the Cymbidiums back into the patio and put them in full sun, or at least half-day sun, in my patio, so they would bloom. Then in August also, we might zap them a couple of times with 0 to 10-10. Meanwhile, I was feeding for growth all the time. Then as they got the spikes would begin to appear. That is the time that you don't have your gardener do it unless he's real good. You want to get your stakes and bring your stakes and stake your plants. Put a stake next to every spike you see coming, because otherwise you might break them. When the spikes are 8 inches tall, bend the spike up and gently tie it to the stake. And then as it grows, when it gets to be about this high and buds, that's when to think about slugs and snails. Now you can use Sluggo, which is safe for pets and people and is just a fertilizer, does no harm. It kills slugs and snails. Or you can use Deadline. This is Sluggo Plus. You don't need for this, and I prefer you don't use Sluggo Plus. The reason is, it does kill sow bugs, but the problem with Sluggo Plus is it contains spinosad, spinosad. Spinosad kills bees, so I don't use Sluggo Plus. Sow bugs don't hurt a darn thing, so why bother with Sluggo Plus? Use Sluggo. Or, I already told you I'm not a purist. I am an organic gardener, I'm not a purist. And this is, I use Deadline. Deadline is not organic. If a cat gets licks deadline, it's not good for them. But no cat is going to lick it. I mean, in my opinion, if a plant there's nothing about deadline that attracts cats.
Dead lime or
Deadline.
Oh, deadline.
What it is a gooey thing. It's a sticky gooey in a bottle, and it drops like a drop. So as the spikes grow up from your plant, put 1 drop of deadline at the base of every spike on the inside, just a drop. That's like stops the slugs and snails at the pass. That's all you need to do. That lasts the whole season, 1 drop. And you can use it also on your clivias. I use it on my clivias every year. I've got hundreds, probably thousands of clivias in huge drifts. We put 1 drop of deadline on the base of every flower spike as they grow, and that's the end of the snails. And it also gets rid of the snails out of a lot of the garden, because they're all heading for the clivias and they all get killed by the deadline. So now if you have a dog that loves wandering through clivia, or a cat who wanders through your clivia or adores your Cymbidiums, don't do it. But my opinion is cats, dogs, raccoons, skunks, whatever, just walk right past Cymbidiums and pay no attention to them. So I see no reason for not using it. That's my personal opinion. So now this is a little tricky, because we want to be sure to get the roots in there. We got to shove them down in. Oh, I'm maybe not through with the whole thing about the schedule. So while I'm doing this, I'm going to continue with my schedule. I left off after telling you that as the spikes begin to grow, you're going to treat the snails next. After treating the snails, then keep the plants in the same place where they are until the blooms open. Once the blooms open, then that's the time to display the plants. Get them out of the full sun. Once those blooms open, move them again. Get Ramondo to move them. And for me, the way I did, I had a table set up. The table is still in this spot in my patio. Covered the table with the plants. Put more plants on the ground. Put some plants on upside down pots. And put all the plants were growing in plastic like this. Every single plant went in a cash bowl. So it looked good. I don't like to look at nursery containers in my garden. So I put the nursery containers into another container with a hole in the bottom, so it looks pretty. Everything in the garden is to do with aesthetics. We want everything to be romantic and gorgeous. And we know that it's man-made, but we want it to look in a way natural and harmonious and no ugliness. Yes.
So when you're saying you mean when the flower comes out, like fully opens, then take them out of the sun, or when it just
When
starts?
the flower opens fully or is almost open fully, then put them in the sun. Now I want to show you. You see how I'm shoving my hand right down in here?
Yes.
That's to make sure that all that bark really gets down in there. I'm working it down with my hand under the roots. I can feel down there, yes.
Is there a minimum number of bulbs that you should have?
That's a good question. Is there a minimum number
or
of
a
bulbs
maximum, or a maximum number?
or maximum? If I were a grower, I would not make a great big, I would probably not make a great big division like this, because I want to make more money. So I would make a smaller division with 3 to 5 back. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So between 3 and 5, and I've already shown you, even if you only have 1, you can do it. So the important thing to remember is never if you plant a plant back into too large a container, it will drown and it will not grow. It will go backwards. It will drown in the soil mix. That's one reason why I like the bark. The bark breaks down eventually, but not too quickly, and it has super drainage. That's what you want. If you have extremely good drainage and you're going to feed regularly, so then when you get, but I'm not through with my schedule yet. I'm going to get to this in just a minute. I want to finish my schedule, okay? As I told you about, get rid of the snails, tie up the spikes. Once they bloom, put them in shade, or bring them in the house, or use them as cut flowers. Enjoy them. They are going to stay in bloom for maybe as long as 2 months, depending on variety. Every time one stem fades, cut it off right away. These were not cut off. You always want to deadhead your garden, make it look good. That is true of Cymbidiums. Try to keep your Cymbidiums, when they're on display, in a place where bees do not visit. Because, and that was true of my patio, bees did not come in there. Bees are attracted to Cymbidium flowers. And once they visit a flower, that flower will blush and fade because it's being pollinated. You won't be able to grow the seed. Most likely it doesn't work for a home garden. You have to go through a different way. Orchid breeding is a whole different thing. You don't want to get into that. But anyway, now let's see. So then you enjoy them in bloom. Then once you've enjoyed them in bloom, and I know I already told you this at the beginning, then they go back in the shade. Then, just to recap a minute, you're going to leave them in the shade and continue to feed them all the time with your slow release or however you decide to do it, or back in your shade house, wherever you're going to keep your Cymbidiums. Just keep them there. And then remember, if you live along the coast, make sure they're going to have enough sun and that spread of temperatures, and you start again. Now, is there anything I've left out? I had a question, somebody. Yes?
How about using a bit of rope for a wick to drain the excess water out of the pot?
That won't do it. It's what happens is the question was, how about using a bit of rope as a wick to drain the water out? That doesn't work. What happens is the orchid bark does a good job of collecting water. It gets water in it, it becomes moist. That's what Cymbidiums like. You never want to let a Cymbidium die out. They're dry out. They hate to be dry. They want moisture, but they don't want any water standing. If you grow them like this in bark and you don't overwater them, you know, watering once a week in zone 24 is plenty. Inland, in Rancho Santa Fe, that kind of place, twice a week. Once a week is plenty. And probably not even water them in winter. You're going to fertilize them and not water them. Probably don't need it. As long as the soil mix is wet, they don't need water. But by growing them in bark, they have it just right. It usually works fine. So the important thing is when you put in the bark, you bring it, and I didn't do it just right, you bring it all the way to the top. The bark needs to be to the top of the container, like that. The pseudo bulbs should be above the bark, and the roots below. This is pretty good. Honestly, I could have done better, but I'm yakking. Becky, honey, could you put that down on the ground? I could have done this better, but you know, I'm trying to show you, I'm at least saying the right thing. So a smaller one like this only has 3. Well, that's 2 back bulbs. I think I would, you know, sometimes a couple of back bulbs can provide I think I'm leaving these back bulbs on because they provide some strength to this. And they're well attached. I'm not going to cut those off. So if you have a small division, it doesn't hurt. Leave a couple of back bulbs on. Yes. The black, are you talking? There is, do you see this? Oh yeah, the brown tips. Most home growers will find some brown tips. This is just from salts in our water or just from, wear and tear in the garden. But you can just, I agree with you, we should always have, pay attention to cosmetics in our garden. So those brown tips do no harm to a Cymbidium. These are really rugged plants. Just cut them off in a point like that. And no one will notice, but it's always good to make a point. I could not have cut those unless yesterday I sharpened. I always keep all my tools sharp when I'm using them. I tell my gardener to do that, he doesn't do it. Always sharpen just one side of the blade, never the inside, only the side, only the bent side of the blade, and never sharpen the anvil. Only want to sharpen here, like that. Just that one blade. That way you can use them like scissors. They'll cut. But yesterday I sharpened all these tools. And had I not done that, I would have been even funnier. So, I mean, it wouldn't have worked so well. Well, I could continue on with this. But, yeah, question. Yes?
Just to reiterate, you shouldn't pot the orchid, they like to be crowded. You want to put them
that's the question. Well, do they like to be crowded? In a sense, yes. The main thing is that they bloom great when they're crowded. And one wonderful thing to do in a home garden, if you have an awful lot of Cymbidiums and you have an awful lot of one variety, fill a whole half wine barrel with Cymbidiums. Fill it with your bark. You can even use the larger gauge bark. Don't use any soil mix. Fill it up almost full with bark and then cover the top with your Cymbidiums. So they almost fit. Just a little bit of room for growth, not much. And then put in the bark around them. Put it somewhere where you think they will at least get a little sun in summer. That is going to be a showstopper in a home garden. And you can leave it in there 10 years maybe, because that's going to get really crowded and even come out a little bit, but it's going to be maybe 10 years before you will have to repot that. Yeah. So big plants don't need it as often. Yes.
I have my Cymbidiums, I have quite a few of them, and they're close to the house where you say they shouldn't be, and they all seem to be blooming okay, and they face the north. They're in.
Okay, well this is interesting. This lady, how close to the ocean do you live?
I'm in Cyprus, so that's sort of
that's the answer. You are not in zone 24, you're in zone 22 or 23. All of you folks, I'm glad this lady asked. She said her Cymbidiums are close to the wall of her house and they bloom fine. Well, the reason is because there are cold nights where she lives. I told you already, but I don't know that everybody heard me. The problem of them not blooming usually occurs under trees or in zone 24, close to the coast, or people who keep them on patios next to their house or on a porch in a mild spot where they're not getting that spread of temperature. If you don't have that problem, like this lady keeps them on the north of her house, Well, the north is going to get cold at night and warm perhaps in the daytime, warm enough. In an interior zone, it's going to have that spread, which is what you want.
So then I don't have to move them?
No.
Okay.
If they bloom fine, you don't need to move. This moving stuff is for those who have a problem bringing them into bloom. And I can tell you in zone 24, most people have that problem. Yes.
What is a minimum temperature for the Cymbidiums at night?
Yeah, good question. What is the minimum temperature? Cymbidiums get frostbite if freezing. They can take down to about 32 or so. If frost is expected, and you have a lot of Cymbidiums and you're not keeping them, they'll be fine in a shade house. If you're not keeping them in a shade house and you have them outdoors, cover them with plastic or a sheet and take it off in the daytime when frost is expected.
They can go down to 32. Yeah.
They can go down to 32, but
40.
yeah, I mean, it's better to keep them above that. But just protect from frost. Yeah.
Are you going to address any of the diseases and their prevention?
Diseases and prevention. I grew Cymbidiums myself for 40 years, and any diseases that Cymbidiums have, I would have seen. Rotting pseudo bulbs, throw the bulb away. Rotting roots, cut the roots off. Black on the leaves, who cares? You know, doesn't matter. They got a fungus. Yeah, they've got some kind of fungus that gives them this black. Well, maybe you'd have trouble selling that one.
Scale.
I've never had scale. I have an organic garden, and I have, this gentleman asked about scale. If you have scale on Cymbidiums, I think there's a problem that you have to solve about scale, and that is you're maybe spraying too much with malathion and killing all the beneficials. I never spray with anything in my garden, and I haven't for years. So I don't use oil spray. Oil spray will get rid of the scale, but you shouldn't have scale. So you should be not using any pesticides of any kind. Quit the pesticides, get rid of the malathion, get rid of whatever you're spraying with, and go organic and encourage beneficials. Bring in the ladybugs, bring out a lot of flowers with pollen, and you won't have scale. That's my opinion. Yeah. Ants don't seem to bother them. They might go to the flowers, but with my system of moving them around, I never had a problem with ants. Ants are a problem in Southern California, but I think you just use anti, yeah.
Do you ever mix your potting mix with perlite or food time release?
No, I don't like perlite in the outdoor garden, and the reason is it's unsightly. It comes to the top. And there's no need for using perlite when we have the bark, which is the perfect soil mix. Yeah.
You say here don't mix any more varieties than one in a pot. Why
Yes.
is that?
I said don't mix more than one variety in a pot. The reason for that is it applies to many plants. Very often, when you mix more than one variety of any cultured plant in a pot, the most vigorous one will crowd the other one out. Besides which, with Cymbidiums, they don't look good in the same pot. They'll bloom at different times, and it will be unsightly. It doesn't look good. But the other reason is because the more vigorous one crowds out the other one. This is so true of epiphyllums. Along with my Cymbidiums, for many years I had a large collection of epiphyllums. Did I say epiphyllum? Yeah, epiphyllum orchids. I mean orchid cacti. And all of a sudden I found out they all went white. Well, my gardener was cutting off leaves and sticking the white one everywhere. They all went white and all my beautiful colors were gone. The white crowded out all the others. The white is the strongest grower. So don't ever mix them.
in zone 22 or 23, when do you put your cymbidiums in the sun?
Zone 22 or 23, when do you put your cymbidiums in the sun? If in zone 22 or 23, if you have them in a place where the foliage just naturally goes yellow, you don't ever need to put them in more sun. They've got enough. Okay, so I guess, am I through?
Soon, I hope.
Back to the wine barrel with the...
The wine barrel, yeah. I hope a lot of you do that. I have a
Let's do the
planning
first
on
one, take it
that.
back.
Yeah.
drainage. Holes on the bottom.
Drainage, yeah, holes on the bottom will work if there's a tendency for soil to get under there or any kind of stoppage of the drainage. Stick the barrel up on little pieces of broken crockery, anything to let the water out. But the half barrel works really well because the bark under, if you don't overwater, that seems to dry out really well. That much bark under the bulbs. All I can tell you is that I have a story. I said that once on a television show years ago. In the 1980s, I was with NBC in San Diego, and everybody got it up here, better than in my own town. And I did a show on Cymbidiums, and the last line was, try filling a whole barrel all with one variety and you'll have a showstopper. Well, this one woman wrote to me a year later. She said she was suffering from depression. And I said that, and she got all excited. And she made the barrel full of the Cymbidiums, but she did not take my advice on the one variety. She put 2 varieties in it. And she was excited because in just 1 year, the whole thing was in bloom the following spring. It bloomed at the same time that the big orchid show was. She phoned the organizers of the orchid show and told them about it, and they said, bring it on down.
Oh my goodness.
She brought this barrel down. Her sons put it in the back of a truck. She had a couple of hulking sons. They got it down there. They got it out. They put it, it was the pièce de résistance of the show, and it would have won first prize, except she didn't obey. She put 2 varieties in, and they told her the only thing that kept her from winning first prize is that she put 2 varieties in the barrel. So make sure it's one variety. She would have won the prize. But nonetheless, her depression went away. This is the truth. She wrote me thanking me. I brought back the joy of life. Or the Cymbidium did. Yeah, well, I better divide this. But you know what? I'm through with this talk now.
Okay, great.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Check middle next week.